Sometimes when I need inspiration, I like to get into character and really feel what I'm doing. It's time to go back in. Hey Grow Up fans, it's me again, Victor Salinas. Today I wanted to do a video about a question that I get fairly often and a recent email that I got from one of our subscribers here on YouTube, Rob. Thank you, Rob, for this question. I get it a lot. I get asked a lot, like, what do I find inspiring? A lot of people want to know where I get my ideas from. And I've covered that briefly on some earlier videos, but just kind of touched on that. So I wanted to do another video entirely devoted to that subject. And again, as I've said before, like, a lot of these questions that I get are so broad. I mean, I could spend the rest of my life probably talking about them. I don't know what good that would do all of us, so I'll try to condense all of that down. So in this video, I just want to talk about one source of inspiration that I rely on really, really heavily, and that is real-world history. For me, as a writer of fiction, especially fantasy, and as I'm working through the Grauwalt series, I'm coming up with a lot of ideas for other novels that I'd like to get to probably years down the line, branching into maybe some historical fiction and sci-fi. But you know, all of those different fiction subgenres to me really rely on a solid understanding of the actual world. So the more in tune or the more aware you are of the real world, you know, the world that we all share, the world in which we reside right now, and its own past, I think the more you understand that, the more readily you'll be able to create your own setting. I mean, you have to know the fundamentals of, you know, engineering before you can build a house. You know, architecture, you have to know the history of it, you have to know the basics of it, and the better the understanding you have, the more solid your structure will finally be in the very end. So I'll just get into a few sources of inspiration for me personally. History in the broadest sense for me is probably like 50% of where I get my inspiration, especially for the Grauwalt series as I'm writing it now. Before I even started to write the Grauwalt series, I read a lot about medieval history, ancient history going back to the time of the Greeks and Romans and their interactions with the Germanic tribes of Gaul in the north. And I followed that through up until, you know, the early modern period, which is like the 17th century. So maybe from about 500 BC to the year 1500, I read a great number of books and articles and watched a lot of documentaries that had to do with Northern Europe, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries. I also read a lot of the mythology to familiarize myself with it and learned a lot of really new and interesting things. And I took all of that knowledge and used that to create the Grauwalt universe. As many of you might know already, having read The Sword and Its Servant, you'll know that it's very heavily influenced on like Germanic, Nordic, Scandinavian mythology, and even the setting itself, like the names and the geography and the institutions, are all adapted from somewhat real-world things. And what I find so awesome about using real-world history for sources of inspiration for fiction is that it's pretty much inexhaustible. Humans have been around, you know, for many millennia, and we've only been recording our history for maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years, actually writing it down. In that, there have been so many historical events, you know, so many nations, so many people, so many happenings that have been recorded. I'm always amazed by how much there is to use in any realm of history. So that's what's so great to me. Like, so many people struggle to come up with original ideas, which, if you ask me, is kind of an impossibility anyway. Everything is kind of an adaptation of something that you've seen, that you're imitating from someone else or some event that's happened to you in your life. So many people, and I have been one of them at different times in my life, have struggled to come up with something entirely original, but all you have to do is crack open a history book, whatever kind of history interests you, military history, economic history, history about the Middle East, about, you know, ancient China, the Romans, what have you. All you have to do is crack open a history book and devote a little time every day to learning about our own history here on Earth, and you will be filled with countless ideas. I'm always just, I suffer now from a deluge of ideas that I can't possibly absorb. Like, I have so many things that I'd want to use from history that I don't know that I'll live long enough to use all of them. So, if you've never really been a big fan of history, you've never tried to read a lot of history and find any inspiration from it, maybe you think it's kind of boring, which honestly can really be if you're not reading the right things, I like to make just a few recommendations to get everyone started. So I'm just going to share 3 sources of inspiration that have served me well throughout the years. I don't want to make this into a sort of like book review video. It's definitely not. Just sharing with Rob and everyone else exactly where I get my inspiration from. These are just a few of the sources. As you can see behind me here, there are a lot of books on history and economics, and I have a couple of other bookshelves with lots of other stuff. So I just want to share some of my favorite ones with you, and hopefully you guys will enjoy them too and can find use with them. The first one that I'm going to share with you is a book called The Birth of Plenty by William Bernstein. I've read all of Bernstein's work thus far. He's actually a financial advisor that has written a number of books on economics. And this one in particular really opened my eyes to the wonder that is the modern world. As you may guess from the suggestion of the title, it's kind of the story of how the world became prosperous, why the world was kind of mired in poverty up until about the year 1800, and what were the factors that combined around the early 19th century to make the world as wealthy and prosperous as it is today, at least for most of us. And of course that's becoming more and more, millions and millions of people are being lifted out of poverty in the modern age. So it kind of explains in a very broad strokes exactly how that happened. So reading this will then refer you to other works about economics. So I'd say this is a really fun thing to read, even if you don't like economics. It's a very fast-moving narrative, and I think it's really fun. I like economics a lot, and I get bored with a lot of it. It can be very dry. I have some economics textbooks that I've kind of forced myself to read through just to have a technical understanding of it, and it can be very boring. But Bernstein's very good at telling a really entertaining story about something that can be very dry, like economics. So I'd recommend that everyone read this or one of his other works. A Splendid Exchange is another really good one. And I think with understanding economics, if you're especially a fantasy or sci-fi writer, you will then understand, what underpins trade, what underpins commercialism, what underpins the society, what makes one country rich and another one poor, what are the factors that contribute to that. And then you can use that to kind of build up your own world, make a really convincing world, rather than one that just, for one reason or another, just doesn't fit. And a lot of times, I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but you'll read something and it just doesn't click. The economy doesn't make sense, the background doesn't make sense. I think if you have a solid understanding of economics through reading economic history, you'll know exactly how to craft a realistic place. The second source of inspiration that I'll share with you, this is a personal favorite of mine, one of my favorite writers of all time, Niccolo Machiavelli. Many of you may know his name, Machiavellian, meaning kind of tyrannical and evil. And I think he's one of the great misunderstood figures of history. I won't get into all that. Maybe if you guys are interested in that sort of thing, I can make a whole video about certain persons in history that have inspired me. But this book is called The Discourses. The full title, I think, translates from Italian to The Discourses on the First Decade, or the First 10 Books of Titus Livy. So in this book, Niccolo Machiavelli, back in 1518, I believe it was, he made a commentary on a Roman historian, Titus Livy, or Titus Livius. So he made a commentary on the first 10 books of that historian. And so he's looking back on, 1,500 years later, Machiavelli's looking back on Titus Livy's history of Rome, and then seeing the parallels between the past and the present as he saw it in the 16th century. And this is a really great book because it will give you a very solid understanding of politics. I'm always intrigued by the fact that no matter how advanced society, civilization, and technology become, politics is always the same. It's always a dirty game. It's always a power struggle. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as good versus evil. I don't really see people necessarily that dark all of the time. But it's amazing that the more things change to me, the more they stay the same. And Machiavelli illuminates that fact very clearly by drawing parallels between the past and the present during his time. And then I think any capable reader would be able to read that and then think back throughout the entire arc of history and realize that not much has changed. So just like with the economics thing, if you have a really solid understanding of how politics work, you'll be able to much better craft a world of your own. And using certain historical events, certain battles, certain elections, different struggles and coups and wars and migrations and all that sort of thing, you can use those to make works now. You can just draw a parallel scenario as a what if, or just completely take it and adapt it to your own purposes. There's, like I said, there's no limit to the number of historical events that you can use in the modern day and time, use for your own purposes. And it's just kind of that effect that it's so old it's new, especially if it's a very obscure piece of history. Many people might not know it, and you can really use it as your own. Okay, the third and last source of inspiration that I'll share with you guys is not a book, however, it is a newspaper. And this is my favorite newspaper of all. It is the Wall Street Journal. This is today's edition. I read this every morning. I don't read all of it all the way through. Reading through a newspaper, there are just too many articles. I'm not necessarily interested in all of them. But there are a couple of stories, that I follow through from beginning to end. And I think it's really important, this ties in with the whole historical aspect. It's really important to be aware of the things that are happening in the here and now. To understand human relations, especially economic and political, and also the personal stories. Wall Street Journal is a really great publication. They share a lot, not just business. They have a very strong business bent, so it covers a lot of economic topics and political topics. But they do have a personal section, and they do get into cooking and hobbies and that sort of thing. So I think having a very broad understanding, a broad scope of what other people go through in the world will inspire you to create new things. Because then you can use that scenario. Like, I've been following really closely what's going on in Saudi Arabia and Yemen right now, with the Saudis doing airstrikes over Yemen airspace because of the rebels that have taken over there. And that has now sparked me. I just last night on Amazon bought a used textbook on Saudi Arabian history up until I think it was 2010 is when that book was released. Textbooks are a really great way to learn something really quickly. And so I want to use that for something at some point, like this whole scenario. I'll just give you a live example. These rebels, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, have started kind of an uprising, and they've actually forced the Yemeni president and the government into exile. So the government's not even in Yemen at all. The rebels have forced them out. And now the Saudis are leading a coalition of other Arab-speaking countries to attack Yemen and remove these rebels. And then, of course, there's this undertone that the Iranians are fueling the rebels' uprising by, providing them logistics and money and weapons. And it's terrible. I mean, this is a terrible humanitarian event, and a lot of people have died from this, and unfortunately I'd have to say that more people will probably die before it's over. But it's these sorts of things that change the course of history. I mean, this is history in the making, and I think if you understand this issue, if you follow these sorts of issues, you can not only gain a better understanding and a better empathy with other people, but you can use that for your own creative purposes. I mean, this whole exchange, I'm just telling you right now, I am going to use this as the basis of either another novel or possibly tie this kind of conflict into the ongoing Grauwald series. So I would definitely have to say that real-world history and current events, which is really just history in the making, form the greatest part of where I get my inspiration from. I've always been very much drawn to history, especially economic and political history, and I should say military history as well, which ties in with that. I've always loved and been fascinated by so many histories of different nations. I love to look up the statistics of different countries, and to me it's not boring because you get to see the way that people have lived throughout history and the way people live now come to life. Unfortunately, there's not enough time or money for me to see the entire world and get to live the way other people get to live. So to me, reading and studying history and economics and politics and current events gives me a window into the way that other people live, so I can kind of get inside their head and understand the struggles and the triumphs of other people. And that to me is the biggest source of inspiration, because that's really what storytelling is you're trying to set up a scenario, an alternate scenario, through a set of another person's eyes, and get your reader to engage in and understand these different emotions and events and possibilities of humanity. So I guess I'm done waxing poetic about how much I love history and current events. I'll end this video by asking everyone where you guys find your inspiration. It doesn't have to be about history, it can be a different subject matter, it could be music, perhaps certain people in your life have inspired you to do things, to succeed, to take a risk, to try something new. Let me know what inspires you in the comments below. I'd also again like to thank Rob. Rob, thank you very much for this question. Again, this is a question that I get a lot. A lot of people ask me where I get inspiration from. It's just the way that your question was phrased, and having got so many questions like that, I wanted to make an entire video devoted to at least one corner of where I get my inspiration from, at least the major part, I would say. I'm always very happy to get emails from you guys. I'm always very happy to answer your questions. I really enjoy getting it, so I don't want anyone to think that you're bothering me by sending me an email. The emails keep this channel going, they keep the videos going, they keep me inspired. I should say that's the other half of my inspiration, is the feedback that I get from readers, from subscribers here on YouTube and also on the Growlithe website, and my friends and family. Just communicating with other people gives me the other half of my inspiration, the fuel to keep going and keep trying. So you guys can always email me directly. I will get back to you every single time. Sometimes it may take a little longer, but I do read every email, and I will always send a response. That's my promise. Don't forget to rate and share this video if you liked it, and subscribe to the Growlithe channel. I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.